You are listening to the Scars and Guitars podcast. My name is Andrew Mackay-Smith, and I hope wherever you are in the world and whatever you've been doing, whatever you are doing even, you're doing very well. The guest on this episode of the show is a bloke called Nick Jenkin, and he is one of the pair that make up the duo in Melbourne-based, in Capital. I really enjoy the band's music. Do go online and check it out. Let's have a listen to what Nick has to say. Here we go. Cool. How's things been, mate, for you recently with the band and stuff?
It's going well. So we launched over the weekend. We had our launch at the Grace Darling Hotel, pretty iconic venue here in Melbourne. And it was a ripper evening. We actually ended up having a couple of mates doing visuals for us. So they set up these lighting rigs at the back of the stage, and we had two bands supporting. So our mate actually opened the night, and then we had another Melbourne band, Glass Diamonds, open for us. And then it actually all came together. Not without incident on the night. My guitar side decided to stop working in sound check, so there was a bit of a mad rush to try and find a replacement. But it's kind of audio. It kind of just happens as you go. You kind of just roll with the punches, I think. So we had a ripper night.
Good on you. And I'm a musician myself, so I can definitely empathise. I run with the mantra of two of everything, right down to amplifiers. Otherwise, yeah, you might be in the middle of a gig in Bundaberg, for example, and something fails, and if you don't have a spare battery or spare bass or guitar or whatever the instrument is you play, the only thing you can't do is have a spare drum kit. You know, we understand that, but my gosh, everything else, mate, there's almost always room for two of the instrument that you're playing. Otherwise, to your point, it just, from my perspective, it's all about confidence when I go up on stage. If I have...
It is.
Confidence the gear that I've got works. Yeah, mate. But that sounds great. So you were well received on the night?
We were. So we had about, I think, a bit over 100 people there. And so we got the crowd up and bopping, as we like to do. So I think we've worked on a live show over there. We've probably been together about 4 years, so we've really worked hard on, making sure that we just don't just turn up and just play, that we really engage with the audience and kind of give them a show. So that's kind of the idea between getting, a big light show going on and just, really giving the punters a bit of a chance to come out and have a bit of a good time. I mean, a lot of the music that we make is quite, it can be intense at times, but it's the light-hearted stuff. We really get rocky and have a good time when we're on stage, so it's a lot of fun.
The name of the new album is called Human Is, and I'm really enjoying it, I've got to tell you. I'm hearing elements of cut copy, the final VHS or beta album called Diamonds and Death, a little bit of synthwave in the vein of Comtrues, and finally Pink Floyd. But mate, how would you describe the album and the band's music to someone who's yet to become acquainted?
Well, thank you very much, Andy. That's I like how you've thrown in a Pink Floyd reference there as well, because let me tell you, David Gilmour, as a guitarist, is a heavily influence on me. But
nice.
For someone who probably hasn't heard it before, maybe that if Tears for Fears and the Drive soundtrack, maybe if they made Sweet Love, then maybe that's where we would come to. So
okay, so that's the film with Ryan Gosling.
It is, yes.
I love that
iconic soundtrack. Yeah.
Kavinsky, College, those synth artists, they're phenomenal. You're a Kavinsky fan, I take it.
Yeah, definitely. No, it's an absolute ripper, that soundtrack. Good movie, but even better soundtrack.
That's so good to hear. You're the first person I've spoken to that actually references the music that's on that soundtrack as being an influence or something that's important. How did you end up getting into it?
I think it's kind of, maybe it was around, I can't really recall the exact time period, but it was probably about 10 or so years ago that movie came out, and pretty much everybody within our circle was obsessed with it. And I think that the soundtrack kind of became a bit of a soundtrack to everyone's lives at the time. You know, pretty much any party you would go to, you would hear, you know, whether it be Washed Out, that classic song from it, or that other song, I forget the name, Real Human Being.
Real Human Being by the band College. Phenomenal song. Yeah, I'll tell you, I'll just share this with you quickly. That song's really important to me because it's a song that I listened to on repeat the day I found out my father passed away. So, to your point that, yeah, it was quite a while ago that one came out, but it's such an ethereal song, and the lyrics in it, too, are so... Man, I don't know where she got them from, but she's pulled them from somewhere cosmic, let me say that.
Captivating, isn't it? It's,
yes.
Yeah, it's interesting how music kind of... You remember periods in your life through music because it's the eternal, or it's kind of like it's a place you can go when things aren't, you know, like you said, it isn't the best time for you, or even, you know, at happier moments, you can kind of pinpoint parts of your life when you were listening to a particular piece of music. And in this case, a lot of the Drive soundtrack around that time was really, I guess it was when we were in or myself and Cam were in our probably mid-20s, around there. So you're kind of in the heyday where you're kind of pretty carefree. There's not much you really care about, and you're just kind of just living life, not really with not much of a care in the world. So it's a pretty nice time to recall.
It is, yeah. It's well framed, what you mentioned there. Yeah, it's just actually I'm taken aback because I just haven't spoken to anybody else that is interested in the soundtrack there, and I've spoken to a lot of people at this point, almost 300 artists, and this is the first time it's referenced, and the soundtrack is definitely in my top 10 albums ever, and Real Human Being, and I was always into Kavinsky. I got into Kavinsky way back in 2005 on whatever the EP was that he released back in those days with Testarossa Overdrive on it. A lot of that, that Canadian and that French synth and dirty electro, I still listen to this day from that era, and it's still music. I heard when I heard Confidence Man, you probably know who Confidence Man are, of course. I could hear a lot of that in the beats that they were putting there. So it's music that still bubbles along in the underground, and it's music that influences the influences.
Yeah, totally. I think, good reference to Confidence Man. They're clearly they're doing great things. But it's even their kind of music. It's exactly what it says it is. And plus they put on a banging show. I remember strolling down I think where was I? I was at Meredith, so that iconic festival in Victoria. And they just had the crowd absolutely in the palm of their hands, and it was mid-afternoon, and it was just an absolute party going in the Supernatural amphitheatre there. But going back to the Drive soundtrack, it's interesting how in some ways soundtracks are kind of we're influenced by the Blade Runner soundtrack, like going back to Vangelis and that sort of thing. So I think that the kind of synth nature of the Drive soundtrack was just something that we really gravitated towards, because it harks back to times of the 80s of synth type music, but it was just in this really accessible pop kind of bow where you could just go, there's actually really great songs underneath all these great synth sounds. So,
yeah, you probably get into a lot of movies from the era too, like The Wraith. Have you seen the film The Wraith?
The Wraith? No. I'll have to put it on the watch list.
Recommended, highly recommended. Yeah, certainly if you're referencing Blade Runner, which I think that's actually my favourite film of all time, and I thought Ryan did a tremendous job in the second one. I've forgotten what it's called, but the one that was released last year, I thought he did an outstanding job. And interestingly enough, mate, he treated Drive as his audition for Ridley Scott. I think he's the director. For Ridley Scott to view that film and say, "This is how much I want to do Blade Runner. Watch my performance in Drive."
Wow.
Okay, so if you go back and
I
watch
did
Drive
not know
again,
that.
you'll notice that he's very, very. It's a cliche to say it's robotic, but he's moving without emotion. I think is the way that he's described it. And it was an audition for his role in Blade Runner, and he just nailed it in both accounts.
Mm.
For a guy that was
What
almost
did you think of that?
he was almost a Backstreet Boy, so he's come a long way. Sorry, mate.
Yeah, no, you're not wrong there. What did you think of the soundtrack of the latest one?
Yeah, excellent. Yeah, big fan. Yeah, yeah. I thought, see as to compare the soundtrack that Daft Punk contributed to Tron, The Return, or whatever I thought that was shit. They missed it completely, I think, there. I couldn't name check the artists on the soundtrack that's on the Blade Runner, the second Blade Runner there, but no, it married up beautifully. I thought that there was way too much space between the actual beats, so the flow was incorrect. And I love Daft Punk, right? By the way, they're one of my favorite collectives ever. But
Mine too.
But I think that was one, and feel free to disagree with me, of course, on this one here. But I think that's one example where those two didn't quite get it right.
Well, it's an interesting beast, Tron, because in some ways I really loved some of the filmmaking and the kind of story that they had, but it was very much a Disney film, so it's kind of how, and then you compare that to the original, and the original is just, it's got so much less money behind it, but it's just completely different. But yeah, I'd actually agree with you. I'd say it wasn't Daft Punk's best work. I'd say there were some moments in there where I really loved, like some crazy sound in Derez, that kind of main song that I had in it.
Sure, yeah, that was a good one. Yeah,
in there, but it didn't have the feel of like a Vangelis or a
Jean-Michael Jarre.
The latest.
None of those guys. That's exactly what it missed. Yeah, the Vangelis and Jean-Michael Jarre thing. Yeah, it just wasn't quite on point with that one there. I think they went a bit too synthy. It probably could have had some organic instruments in the mix, which Daft Punk have always done. And I actually bought the album, and I don't think I've listened to it much beyond 2 or 3 listens in the car, which is when I typically have an opportunity to listen to things properly, because of course when I try to listen to things before I go to bed, I end up going to sleep after 30 seconds or a minute, so I miss the whole thing.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, no, I'm just trying to think of other films that have had really good iconic soundtracks in that vein, but really I can only think of Drive as really appealing to me in that manner. But can you think of any others that have had a great synth soundtrack?
Not off the top of my head, because I guess there's one thing that's really clear in all those, in Drive and in Blade Runner. The soundtrack is so good that it stands on its own as a piece of the movie, whereas usually soundtracks are kind of a supporting material to the body of work that's already been produced. So I think, that's the clear is when you actually remember the soundtrack, is, when it's that good that you kind of listen to it on its own. So
yeah, I mean, there's the ones from back in the day too, like the Titanic soundtrack and the Top Gun soundtrack, but none of that sort of music appeals to probably guys like you and I. So for a movie like Drive to have brought in artists, and I understood that they specifically asked those artists to contribute. Now, I know Kavinsky had already had his track out, which was Night Call, the year prior. I think that had come out the year prior on an EP. But they were so taken with that, and of course it marries up so beautifully with those opening sequences when they're travelling over LA and it's either a helicopter or a drone that they're doing it. But it just, you couldn't have been any other song to suit that opening sequence, I don't think.
No, I'd agree with that. There's something about the soundtrack that is just so beautifully married to the visuals. It just goes, it's seamless almost.
Let's talk about your wonderful music. So I've been listening to it quite a bit, I've got to tell you. I've put it on.
Thank you.
So I've actually had it on in the background when friends, family, or guests are visiting. That's where I like for music to find a place in my life, and that's where your music is working for me. But I need to ask, what is the intent behind creating your music? Is it purely a creative pursuit, or do you have some commerce in mind as well? And the reason I ask that question is because it could actually cross over into mainstream radio, a lot of your stuff.
Oh, well, thank you. I think commerce is not in the pure sense of the word of actually making money from it. That's not what we are interested in. We're interested in getting it out there and kind of, I guess seeing where it takes us. I mean, we kind of have this view that we'd love to play Golden Plains Festival in Melbourne at some point, or Meredith. It's kind of a dream. So that's really the target that we set ourselves. In terms of actually making the music, it's a very, I guess commerce doesn't really come into it at all, because we are self-run, self-funded. We are DIY, so our recording process is very much just us two. Really, the only time that we get someone else involved is when we're getting our friends to give, the tracks a listen when they're getting towards being finished, or we go to mastering and get it mastered down here at Deluxe Mastering with Adam Dempsey. So, it's very much not. We don't think of commerce, I guess, when we're trying to put it together, and it's very much just getting in that creative process and just seeing what comes about.
Here's somebody. As soon as I heard your music, there was one name that came to mind. Now, I use my intuition a lot when I'm thinking of these sorts of things. So the one name that came to mind that would be a great collaborator for you guys would be Kylie Minogue. Now, her album from now bear with me while I explain this. Her album from I think it was year 2000 or 2001, the one that had the album's called Light Years, and it had a track on it called On a Night Like This, and what she did there was a bit like...
Track,
yeah, remember that track?
So it is...
You're right, mate. Sorry, it's just breaking up.
If I recall, that track was quite a dancey number. It was probably the first dancey number she'd released. I think she had a song that kind of goes, "Got to put this business to bed." Then this was kind of like removed from all the stuff she'd done before, and it was kind of the first real dancey track.
It was moody stuff, so it had a similar atmosphere to your music. It was clear. Don't get me wrong. It was clearly not written by her, though, as none of her stuff is. At the very least, it's a collaboration. But it was someone like, remember when Madonna did Music? Was it Music or the one that she did Ray of Light in 1998 with William Orbit? And she brought him in to update his sound, and we all know what happened after that. Her career just even went... She became twice as big as what she was before that, and she was already enormous. So.
Yeah.
But where I'm bringing the reference in is that because you can bloody well play the guitar. So I'm a musician, and I can tell you know what's going on with that guitar. Marrying that up with your electronic music sensibility, she could do far worse, mate, than to reach out to yourself and say, "What do you think about just working on a demo?" If that opportunity ever came up, presented itself, do you think you'd take it?
Absolutely. I guess the body of work that we've done thus far, and kind of say yes to opportunities. It's very much. I think we're quite humble in our approach to music and kind of songwriting, and we'd like to think that the music stands on its own. But I think you'd be silly to pass up an opportunity to work with a massive pop star like Kylie Minogue if that opportunity did present itself. So, plus I think female vocalists and kind of synth music, it is a really great combination. So,
indeed, yeah, it is. So talking about the album again, were the songs the product of a lifetime of writing, or did it come together rather quickly for you?
Well, our recording process, I guess, is somewhat unique. Probably not so much these days with the invention of basically the mobile recording studio. So basically, Cam and I, the band actually started from a recording experiment where we went down to the Victorian coast and recorded. We went down thinking we might come back with 2 tracks. and we came back with 7, and then our first EP was born from that. And so essentially there was a kind of process in that we found really worked for us. So we'd go down. We actually recorded this album in the Grampians National Park. For those that don't know, it's actually a huge mountain range in Victoria, a really beautiful mountain range. And so we went down there, and essentially I sent Cam probably about a week prior a bunch of music that I was working on at the time, and Cam soaked up a few that he actually found he was that he was gravitating towards at the time. Mm-hmm. And so then when he spent 10 days in the Grampians overlooking Mount Sturgeon into a valley on this farm stay, and just lived and breathed music for 10 days. So essentially majority of the songs on the album were recorded down there. So I'd say there were probably maybe 3 or 4 that we kind of had the bones of when we went down. But majority was done within those 10 days down in the Grampians.
It sounds beautifully polished, so it's a really well-produced album. How did you record it? Was it on Pro Tools or a similar DAW? And how did you then go about the process of mastering it, or who did you send it to for mastering?
So and thank you, we recorded through Ableton. I actually studied music at SAE here in Melbourne. I actually took some time off work and did a course for about a year part-time, and just learnt the craft of recording. And so that means that I'm able to engineer when, Cam's doing a vocal take, or I can jump up and do a guitar take, or we can do BVs kind of as on the fly. It just means we've got a lot of flexibility. But essentially, we recorded, we then spent 9 months mixing it. And so that was a collective thing. It's a really great thing to be able to, mix in your room. But then Cam comes in, and he's got a very, very keen ear, because he's a filmmaker and he's very good at editing. He knows when something's finished. So it's really great to have that ear. Whereas my strength is probably in arrangement and, kind of arranging the stereo picture, so it's kind of full and lush, and there's stuff going on here, there, and everywhere, and EQing stuff in the right way. Mm-hmm. And then when it was finally done, we sent it off to Adam Dempsey at Deluxe Mastering. So it's really that's where we kind of put the finishing touch on when we're ready for it to be mastered, and it's kind of a nice end to that whole process of when you can say, yep, it's done, it's ready for mastering. And Adam's really great as well, because he'll give you feedback too, which I think is pretty unique. A mastering engineer that'll come back and say, the bass is a little bit much here, I'll probably pop some more shelf EQ on there, or I'm getting a lot of highs in this track, and he just he's very good at giving feedback that's in a very constructive manner.
So I can see in one of the photos that you got on Facebook that you've got the Roland Juno keyboard there, but what about a TR-08 or a SPD SX sampling pad? What gear did you use when you were recording it all?
So we run everything through a Focusrite. It's like a 4-in. It's got 4 mic pre's in it.
I got the same one.
I guess
is that the red one?
Yeah,
the crimson one.
Great. It's red, I think.
Red. It's called Scarlet. Yeah, the Scarlet 4i. Is that right? 4i.
Yeah, I think it's a 18i8. So yeah, we've got the same one. So yeah, it's a great little unit. So basically, indeed. I mean, I've acquired some more gear. I mean, every time we record something, I kind of find new gear that I kind of want to get. I mean, I'm looking at a mic pre at the moment that I've just acquired. It's a Sebetron, but we didn't use that in that process. Basically, the vocals were recorded with a Rode K2. the BVs were recorded with an SM7B, so a Shure. The guitars always recorded with an SM57 kind of off-axis a bit, just to let a bit of air come out. Acoustic guitars are recorded in triple track through that Rode K2 again. We recorded bass through a AKG D112, so a kick mic that's really got on lows. What else? Oh, the synth I usually just DI, but sometimes I'll stick it through an amp as well. So that's the Roland Juno.
Of course, yeah.
And I also got a digital synth that doesn't sound as great, but essentially I'll stick that through DI as well. But yeah, it's just it's interesting the change from the EP to the album, where it just became more about performance and getting the right tones and chasing that analog sound. And now it's basically what we're all about. It's trying to find a way where you do justice to the instruments that you've got, and the Roland Juno is one mighty instrument in that process. That sounds amazing. So yeah.
What about the guitars and the basses that you decide to use? Do they have any impact on your sound? So, for example, I've got a Strat, and it's a really dark sounding Strat, which is really good for playing rock and roll, as I like to do. But, mate, what sort of guitars were you using?
So I use actually a Yamaha Strat copy that I've used, that I actually got when I was 16, that I've had for ages, but it's just a really great player, and it has a very sweet sounding pickup for clean sound. But my main guitar I use is a Gretsch Electromatic, just because I like the jangly sound, and coupled that when it's up loud, it sounds amazing. So there's a track on the album called Universal Man where I think there's a bit of a guitar solo in there, and that was just with a lot of distortion, a lot of fuzz, and just cranked up, going through a Vox amp. So it's just chasing. I think that's one thing that we've Cam and I bring to the table, is we kind of chase sounds that are unique. I guess a Gretsch is probably not the most iconic guitar, but they just sound great when they're up loud. So
very popular. A lot of musicians I know use them and love them. You tend to find people who use Gretsch won't use anything else.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. I'm sold on them. I broke mine over the weekend, but it's got me looking online for the next one, because it's actually a semi-hollow body, so it's essentially, I think, like a jazz guitar, but it's a bit cumbersome when you're trying to play a solo. But yeah, it's got me thinking maybe I need more of a lightweight one, because like a Fender Strat is just so much easier to play sometimes.
Oh, they are. They're the Holden Commodore or Ford Falcon of working musicians, really, aren't they? And they just deliver every time, in my experience. Yeah, them or the Mate and Master sounds are also very good too if you're looking for another option. You can buy them quite cheaply second hand these days as well.
Yeah, iconic sounds.
What's the public's response been like to the album? Has it been where you wanted it to be? Have you got a lot of positive feedback from people who, the thing is that you want this music obviously to reach as many ears as possible without compromising your artistic integrity. So do you get a lot of people like me giving you very enthusiastic and positive feedback about it?
Yeah, I think generally, I think that the hardest thing, I guess, a lot of the time is to actually have the time to sit down and listen to it. And obviously, you've done that, so thank you for taking a listen.
No problem. Yeah,
it's kind of a body of music, I guess, where we sequenced it in a way where it made more sense when you listen to it all the way through, because I guess some of the music is a bit removed from one another, but they kind of all flow together when you listen to it in a collective group. So I think, generally the feedback has been very positive, and it's quite clear that even though there's maybe 3 or 4 different variations of favourites, generally the favourites are centering around the ones that we always thought were the strongest. So it's really nice to hear. I guess we've had it in the making for so long. It's just really nice to get it out there and get people's views on it. And the greatest thing is when someone tells you that they really enjoy the song, and it just it makes it all worth it. Not that it wasn't, but yeah.
Probably my most common question that I ask Australian artists is this one here. How can you broadcast your wonderful music to as broad a possible audience as you can? So I'm talking about not just the Australian market, the Asian market in particular. I think for Australian artists, is just for whatever reason we don't focus on it, which I don't know why. I mean, my wife's half Filipino, so we spend a lot of time in the Philippines, and they love Australian music over there, especially the sort of music that you're producing here, because they're all about family and getting together. And when you go into pubs their version of pubs and clubs, which are more like cocktail bars, this is the sort of music that I would expect to be hearing played in the background. So how can you reach an appreciative audience, do you think?
It's an interesting one because, we've been around for probably about 4 years in total. I think I think you have to start local, especially in Melbourne. Melbourne's I'm sure it is in Brisbane as well. There's always such great bands coming out of pretty much every Australian city. But you kind of need to conquer, essentially, the local audience. And I guess we're trying not to get ahead of ourselves, and that we kind of need to do some time in the pub scene here and just kind of get a following locally. But if there was, I guess we don't really know about the avenues to get it out, within the Asian market.
One.
So, yeah.
I know it's a tough one.
It's something that we'd definitely be open to suggestions from anybody. But, I think our focus is going to be locally. And I think maybe that's what a lot of bands are taught, focus locally and then build your craft as you go.
Indeed. So on your Facebook page, you mentioned Le Bon Ton, which is a restaurant, cocktail bar and absinthe saloon in Collingwood, I believe. So is that important to you, that business? Or are you involved in it somehow?
No, it's actually sort of a joke. It's actually got more to do with our rehearsal space. So we actually rehearse. We rehearse in. I'd actually forgotten that we'd written that. Cam's, he's got a good sense of humour, but basically our rehearsal space is probably about a 10-minute walk from the Bon Ton, and so we would smash out like 2-3 hours of rehearsal, go and have a dinner break, and head to Le Bon Ton, and it's quite a heavy meal. So you go in there and you have, a smoked cheeseburger on. It's kind of deep South Americana foods.
Okay, yeah.
You go in there, they've got, there's great beers, great cheeseburgers, great music, kind of bluesy, kind of Americana playing, and then you stumble out of there and go back and try and bust out the rest of the set while you're just burping back all that beer and all that cheeseburger that you just ate. So, the Bon Ton is an experience.
Yeah, I can imagine, mate. I do envy you guys down there, I've got to say. I used to be an account executive for Telstra, so I used to spend a lot of time in Melbourne. And, my God, the eating places and the establishments where you can drink beer and God knows whatever else. I mean, I know it says absinthe saloon. I don't even think we have an absinthe saloon in Brisbane. I know they tried one down on the Gold Coast that didn't last, but we just don't have the population here that gets into that indoors lifestyle. We're far more about the outdoors here, is the cliche. But it's...
I think it's... There's something to like about both cities. I think, I spent a little bit of time in Brisbane, and it's a very likeable city for different reasons. Melbourne does have a lot going on, but it also has the weather going on, and it's just starting to get a bit cooler now. So you're kind of like, well, staying in Brisbane for a while would be quite nice.
Yeah,
whether you guys have up north, so yeah.
Yeah, I think I was getting into the car after taking the kids to their swimming lessons, and it was still 31 degrees, and that was about, according to the car anyway, and that was 6:15 in the evening. So
there you go. It felt like a bit of an onset of winter today in Melbourne. I ride my bike to and from work, so yes. Yeah, it's getting fresh. Put it that way.
All right. Well, that's about it from me, mate. Now, for people out there that are listening, how can they get in touch with you, and how can they find out about your wonderful music? You've obviously got your Facebook page, but where else can they discover what you guys are doing?
So, yeah, if they want to keep updated with what's going on with the band, facebook.com/incapital. We're also on Spotify, so the album up there for listening. Just stick a follow on Spotify when you go there, and you'll be kept up to date with everything. When we release new music, there's no plans to release some just yet, obviously, with the album just out, but we do have recording booked in for November this year. So,
have you got merch on offer and other ways that people can support you guys financially?
I think the main thing at the moment is probably just getting the follows up on Facebook and on Spotify. So if people want to support us, it's probably going to be through the online mediums. So obviously we'd be super appreciative of that. But in terms of merch, no, nothing just yet. But as demand comes, I guess we would look into that. So, yeah.
Actually, final question. You're playing any shows interstate, particularly here in Brisbane?
We would love to come up to Brizzy. I think there's been a few questions about whether we would come up to the north, and we've got a few things on the blower at the moment, just trying to lock down a few things. But you guys will be the first to know if we're coming up your way, so we'll definitely be hitting up you guys at 4ZZZ.
Excellent. Yeah, wonderful, mate. Yeah, no, definitely. Well, I'll certainly be in the audience when you guys do perform.
That'd be awesome.
Thanks, mate. This has been a wonderful chat. It's an excellent album, this one you've got here. I implore anybody out there that's even slightly into electro-themed pop and rock music to get into this stuff here, because I think it's probably the best electronic release that I've heard all year. I've got to hand it to you about that, and my God, I get a lot of releases to listen to, but this one's really stood out. I'm not just saying that to blow smoke up your ass. It truly is an excellent album, and I feel like it's an album, too, that I can listen to over a couple of years and it's not going to get old. And that's a real compliment as far as I'm concerned, because, as I say, I got a lot of stuff.
That's very kind of you.
You know, it's the case. I mean, I listen to stuff and then I go back to it, and 3 months, 4 months later, I think, God, that already sounds a bit stale, to be frank. But your stuff, here's another band I'll throw at you, is Icehouse. Some of their stuff that they did when they had whoever was that was doing the remixes for them. And I can't remember the name of the album that they released, but they released a remix album in the early 2000s, and it reminded me a little bit of that.
Wow.
Yeah, and it's, look, all of this drills down to the fact that the music is accessible, and it really should be able to reach a really broad audience. I just hope that when you roll the dice, you come up double sixes, so to speak, and well, you know, you pick your number on the roulette table, mate, and something really nice happens for you guys, because I think you deserve it.
Well, thank you very much for that, Andy. I really appreciate the kind words, and you know, kind of hearing those words makes it all, I guess, all the time and effort you put into it, it actually makes it all worth it. Like I said before, not that it really, we need it because we just love doing it so much, but it's really just lovely to hear those words. So thank you very much, and thanks for having me.
No, my pleasure, mate. My name is Andrew Mackay-Smith, and you are listening to the Scars and Guitars podcast. That was my conversation with Nick Jenkin, one of the two members in Melbourne-based In Capital. Thank you so much for listening.